So maybe you would prefer me speaking English, as I'm from Denmark, and at least when I'm in Gothenburg, there's one who always complained that I should speak English because it's difficult to understand my Swedish. So maybe you will appreciate that as well. So I'm Nikolaj Sørensen. I'm the CEO of Orexo. I've been with Orexo since 2011. I became CEO early 2013. Prior to that, I worked with Pfizer, where I was responsible for Sweden, and I was also responsible for a brand called Lyrica, where I had people all over Europe reporting into me. So I've basically been responsible for sales in every European countries and Australia and New Zealand. With Orexo, I've been part of building up our unit in the US, and I'll come to that shortly. See if I can move forward here. So we have a subsidiary sitting in Morristown, New Jersey, that we established in the summer of 2013. In Morristown, New Jersey, we have all of our commercial operations, but we also moved our clinical development to Morristown, New Jersey, because that's where we see our key market for Orexo is in the US. So it's easier to do clinical studies and understand what is needed in the home market of the US. I would say I personally have been a lot to the US. When we launched, I was in the US every month. And one of the experiences, given that we're today talking about opioid addiction, that I think is a little unique is I've actually been out visiting, I'm counting more than 100 different clinics in the US, all over the US, from Florida to Chicago, to Boston, to Pittsburgh, you name it. And I've been out there seeing these doctors. I met patients all over the US. So I think I have a pretty rich experience. And at the same time, daily, every day, we have more than 60 people in the US out visiting clinics. And if they do what they should, they're visiting 8 different clinics every day to get feedback also what is needed in the market and how's the market dynamic. So where are we with Orexo? I think one thing that put us a little apart from a lot of other Swedish companies that we actually today come from a very strong financial position. In 2017, we had our second year of positive profit. We also have, for the last 2 years, generated more than 300 million krona in positive cash flow from operations. And today we are net cash positive. So even though we have a corporate bond, we actually didn't do that because we needed it. We did it because we could, and we can use that to develop the company further. Another part that I worked a lot with for the last couple of years is improving the efficiency in the company. And just like the previous speaker, it's very important to bring down the cost of goods. And that's something we have worked intensively on for the last couple of years, because looking into the addiction market, one of the big challenges is to make the treatment affordable, both the naloxone treatment, as we just heard from Claria, but also when you get to the treatment of patients. If you're just looking at today's budget of about $2.5 billion in pure medicines cost, if we want more patients to get access, we can't afford to increase the prices substantially. And that's why we see we have a unique opportunity, because today I'm pretty sure that we are the cheapest product to produce in the US. And we know today we compete in prices which are below some of the generic prices in the market. And that results in us, and that's something that focus we had last year, is to make agreements with insurance companies. And today we have the best market access we've ever had since launch. And if we look at the privately insured segment, we actually have better access than any other product in the market, including the market leader Suboxone film, but also the generics. We did get approval in Europe in November last year. So now we are planning for launching in Europe, actually with the same partner as Claria. So it's Mundipharma who is going to launch our product. We expect to see the first country coming out in early Q2. And then maybe the overhang for those of you who have followed us for a while is that we've had a patent litigation hanging over us. We had a hearing in the federal court in October. We felt that it went very well. So did our lawyers. And right now, time is actually playing in our favor, because if it was a decision purely against us, we would have known that already. That doesn't mean that the decision necessarily become purely for us, but it's not a firm decision, say we approve the decision from the district court. There will be some kind of change because of the time that has spent. So where are we right now? The focus for the company is definitely to leverage the position we have in market access, and I will come a little back to that later. It's also to launch Zubsolv outside the US. We have the rights we are supplying Mundipharma. We had the first supply now in Q4, but we are going to produce and sell Zubsolv to them. So we actually have income streams, both from royalties, but also from selling products to Mundipharma. Then with the money that we have on our cash account right now, and as remember, we have positive net cash, we have a positive cash flow. We had nearly 150 million in positive cash flow last year. So we're basically building financial capacity. We have a pipeline with some products that we have communicated and a few other products that are still to be disclosed because we're waiting for the proof of concept data. So I hope we can add on to the pipeline during this year. But also on business development, I've been to talks with several companies, but it is a challenge as a small Swedish company to come out and discuss business development if you haven't secured your financial position. And where we are right now is that we have a decent amount of cash and we have a positive result backing it up to drive growth coming forward. So where is the focus for us, both in business development and R&D? It is on a range. We've decided to focus our efforts on addiction because of the experience we get from meeting physicians. And we're talking hundreds of physicians every single day. We get a lot of feedback into what is needed in the market, what drives the market. And here we see we can improve treatment. Zubsolv is one area, but also our new product, OX382, which is a swallowable tablet, is an example of an area where we're working on treatment of addiction. Then there are symptoms and comorbidities of addiction. People who are addicted to opioids are the most complex people that you can imagine. Often they suffer from pain, they suffer from a range of psychiatric disorders. And here we see an opportunity for us to broaden our pipeline, either as a co-promotion or develop or in-license our own products in that area. And finally, just as we heard, there's a prevention of addiction. How can we remove the people to get into an addicted situation and maybe get to overdose? One thing could be co-prescription of naloxone with painkillers so people don't overprescribe or overuse their painkillers. But I also think there are a lot of other technologies that we as a pharmaceutical company industry have missed. We have not taken the responsibility to develop new formulations of pain medications that could replace the opioids that we're using today. Looking at where we are, we have development projects and ideas in all of these categories, and we also have business development discussions ongoing with different companies in all of these categories at the moment. So where are we with the company? Our lead product is Zubsolv for opioid dependence. It's about 80% of our revenues, but we also have license income from Abstral, which is it's a cancer pain product. We have license income from Edluar, insomnia. We're about to launch Zubsolv in Europe. We have a phase 2 ready, or past phase 2 with OX51, which is a very potent opioid. In favor of time, I probably need to come back to that at a different time. And then we have our products that we're in the bottom line, and that's really where we focus. We have OX382 for opioid dependence and potentially pain. We also have several undisclosed projects, and the reason why we don't disclose them is we want to be sure that we have enough data to ensure that we can file for a patent, so our competitors don't get the ideas from us and start to work on the same before we have filed patents. So we will disclose them as we get enough data to file for a patent. And just looking at OX382, which is we aim to be the first swallowable tablet. And what really differentiates OX382 in this market is it's a tablet that you basically take with a glass of water and then you swallow it, whereas the current formulation of Suboxone and Zubsolv, they are all based on sublingual technologies, meaning that you take it under the tongue and then you wait it for it to dissolve. If you look across all different disease areas, at least I am unaware of any area where a sublingual tablet is favored ahead of a swallowable tablet if you don't have a clear medical benefit to the patients. And here we actually have a maintenance treatment, so it's not supposed to be fast acting. It's more that today it's more effective to give it sublingually than should you swallow the tablet. We have the first patients actually in. I heard yesterday they had the second dosing, all of the patients. So we expect to get some results in Q2. And that will give us some proof of concept that it actually works. And then we have Zubsolv, our lead product. And I'll be very brief on where we are with Zubsolv. Zubsolv is a buprenorphine naloxone product. Buprenorphine is in there as an opioid replacement therapy. It's basically taking away the cravings. It's you can say a nicer opioid than the ones that people normally take. If you take heroin, one doctor explained it to me, it's like you're coming in and someone just into a dark room and someone light up a Christmas tree, and it's just like the most sparkling light that you can imagine. If you take buprenorphine, it's like someone is just slowly fading up the light. to never get sparkling, and then it's just slowly fading down. But with heroin, it's like someone turning off the switch overnight, and that is what is immediately, and that's what gives you the cravings. So this is basically enabling people to have a normal life. It is the main competitors in the market today is Suboxone, and it's a special Suboxone film, which is marketed by a company called Indivior. And why should you then believe that Zubsolv have a chance? When we entered the market, we had a lot of clinical data. I think actually still to date, we have the broadest clinical program of any company in the industry. And we saw when patients took our product, they actually favored our product. So in a direct preference test to Suboxone film and even Suboxone tablet, they actually preferred, and we're talking 70 to 80% of patients preferred our formulation compared to the other competitors. And then we have worked intensely to create a broad dosage range. So what does that mean? We see that in this area, there's a significant need for patients to dose to effect. Some days they need more, some days they need less. So here with a broader dosage range, they can better adapt their treatment to the needs. But most importantly, I think just listening, and this is coming back from the physicians that we're talking to, one of the issues you have today in the market is that patients are basically often titrated up to the dose where they get effect, but there's no one taking a responsibility for tapering them down to the minimum or even to abstinence. And what we heard from the market is that this 1.4 milligram, or what is equivalent from other companies, is too high. You need something lower to be able to taper patients down. And that's what we have developed, this 0.7 milligram. So today we actually have an opportunity to take, for patients, take very small steps upwards and very small steps downwards to hopefully one day get them down to abstinence or a very low dose of Zubsolv and get them maintained on that. So looking at Europe, where we're about to launch, the European market is much smaller than the US. We have different data indicating about 1.3 million patients in Europe who are high-risk users. A lot of them are coming from heroin, whereas in the US it's really painkillers. In the US, there's all kind of numbers floating around, but I think the consensus right now is that we're talking somewhere between 10 to 20 million Americans who are suffering from some kind of addiction or dependence on opioids. 10 to 20 million Americans. So the European market is much smaller. It's much more controlled here in Europe. A lot of countries like Sweden have pretty good social security systems, so we know who the addicted patients are. But in the US, there's this big hidden group of people who are taking painkillers that are not really identified by the systems, and also there are no central systems to monitor the patients. So Europe is interesting, but the US is much bigger. And looking at the market in the US, we have a situation where right now, if you listen to the White House, they're citing about 64,000 people died from addiction or drug overuse in 2016. That does include other products than opioids, but opioids were nearly always involved in some shape and form. So this is an immense problem. And just looking at how many people who are using opioids in the US, the issue is not, can we grow 6 to 7% per year? I think the issue we have is that 90% of the patients are without any kind of treatment today. And how can we broaden that treatment? And how can we broaden it in a way that is affordable for the system and not breaking the system, just like we heard now that the entire rescue medication budget was going on to naloxone. I think we as a pharma industry has a responsibility to bring affordable products to the market also. And just listening to the White House, and we actually have a pretty good relationship even with Chris Christie, who's leading the Opioid Commission, or led the Opioid Commission. There's no doubt that they understand the problem. The issue we have right now is that there's a lot of talk, but there's no money. And I think there's a need for this one to really fly. There's a need for money to come in. But there's no doubt we get the attention from the politicians in the US as needed. So just taking the experience that I have from this more than 100 visits to different clinics in the US and talking to multiple key opinion leaders, I think the biggest issue in the US is access to treatment. It's access to medical assisted treatment, where a lot of patients are doing purely abstinent treatment without use of any kind of medical assisted. And to get more patients into medical assisted treatment, we also need to ensure that we have an affordable treatment for the patient. So access, get more patients into treatment, I think is the absolute key from getting from 10% treatment up to the numbers we see for other chronic diseases, which are often in the 70 to 80% of people with the disease get access to some kind of treatment. And we're into the recognition of value of MAT. MAT is medical assisted treatment, which buprenorphine, methadone are the two biggest ones. What I see in the US is that a lot of people, and I can recognize that as being a father to teenage daughters. If one of my daughters got addicted, I would say just get rid of the stuff. I don't get them abstinent. But this is actually one of the biggest causes of death in the US, is people getting their kids abstinent, putting them into very expensive resorts, often down in Florida. They come back and have to face reality of life. And what happens when you face reality of life? You actually start to get your cravings is starting to come back. And what's the solution when you feel cravings is to take opioids. You take it, and then often people take the same as they did just before they went into their treatment, resulting in an overdose. And here we need all of the larger centers to recognize the value of medical assisted treatment. And then we also need the entire system in the US to recognize the need to find programs to get people down to the lowest possible dose over time. But you can't just stop at a heartbreak. There's no data to support that approach. We need to develop new treatments. I think today the big pharma companies have completely ignored this space. But going back to the 80s and 90s, where both depression came first, and in the 90s you saw depression became very big. The biggest sold product was Zocor from Pfizer, where Zoloft from Pfizer, where this suddenly got a lot of attention from the big pharma companies. We've seen the same with obesity, which have been very stigmatized, and now we see all of the big pharma companies starting to invest. Hopefully Orexo, with our positive cash, when we see ideas, can be part of financing and be part of developing new treatments which are not based on opioid replacement therapies. Then you need to control prescription of opioids, and of course also the non-prescription opioids, the criminal products. And here we see there is a lot of efforts going on in the US, but the problem you have is when you're taking people away from their painkillers, they're still addicted. It doesn't remove, because you just can't get access to your OxyContin, you're still addicted. So when you're taking away the painkiller, what do? You go down on the street and you start to buy, maybe first you buy the painkillers that you just took on the street, but they're very expensive. One tablet of OxyContin is often $80 to $100. You got it for free when you got it prescribed. One dose of heroin is $10 maybe. So what happens, people start to take heroin, and then you actually go from the ashes to the fire. In Philadelphia, they did a lot of efforts to bring down the use of painkillers to adolescents, so people from somewhere around 18 to 22 years of age. What happens, they quadrupled in the number of deaths on overdose because people basically went to the street and used heroin. So it's not an easy solution right now just to stop prescribing opioids, as some people suggest. And in the end, we need to destigmatize. We need to get people to be open about their problem and to seek help. We need physicians to be open about the issue and helping to treat patients. And here there's still a lot of work to do, but I can say it's a very different environment than it was 2 years ago in the US. Then a little about Zubsolv and the market. We've seen the market growing with more than 10% if we look quarter over quarter. In the fourth quarter, it's 11.3% compared to the same quarter the year before. The interesting part is that it's really growing is the public market, and just bringing down, I actually went back a little too fast. In the public market, what you've seen is Obamacare that is coming in. People get access to insurance, and also there was a change in legislation in 2016 which allowed more physicians to prescribe. But to be able to prescribe to more patients, you had to take insurance, and that is actually driving on the need for Medicaid. Medicaid has a completely different payment willingness to pay than the commercial insurance companies. So here again, price become extremely important to make it affordable for the Medicaid. Otherwise, they won't use it. So just looking at Zubsolv. So Zubsolv has gone a little like a staircase, a little up and down. I can tell every time we go up, and every time we go down, it is explained by market access, agreements with insurance companies. If you don't get agreements with insurance companies, you have a major issue. And this is where we come back again to make it affordable and be cost competitive. And just looking at where we are right now, we actually had the second week of this year was the third highest ever. It was actually the highest ever in terms of milligram prescribed Zubsolv. Then you always have the kind of little catch-up effect after the Christmas season, so it's normally a high week. The last 2 years we were cheated for that of different reasons, but this year we saw a big bump, and then you see a little fall down after that. So, but looking ahead for this year, we're moving the share of the market that we have exclusive. When we got United is exclusive, WellCare is exclusive. We have about 3% of the total market in the US have exclusively reimbursement of Zubsolv, and we're doubling that this year. So during this year, we're going up to 6%. We are going up to 96% of the people with private insurance have access to Zubsolv, and we're going up to more than 40%, it's actually 43% of the people with a public insurance have access to Zubsolv unrestricted. And that is really the key in the US. If you don't get things reimbursed, you have no sales. So that's our big focus have been historically, and commercially, this is really where we play now. This is more like a tender business, getting tenders with the insurance companies, work with insurance companies to find an affordable price that is make it valuable for them. And I think this year we have done it tremendously well, so we definitely have a good foundation to grow in 2018. And this is really where our focus is. How can we leverage the 96% unrestricted access? A lot of that is pretty low rebate. So if we get to the growth also, we actually have some pretty profitable growth ahead of us. Then the biggest one of these is a company called CVS Caremark. And with CVS Caremark, that is going to be a street fight, because we don't get anyone. We're not replacing something. We just get access to compete with the other companies. But I do think there is a good opportunity for us to grow in here. And then we have 2 exclusive agreements, Envision and Humana. And they're right now about to implement. We've seen Humana has implemented part of it, but not all of it. Envision is still in the early stage of implementing our agreement. So we expect to see really the impact coming late in this quarter and into next quarter. Then we have Medicare, which is for people who are retired. We have our first exclusive agreement. That actually kicks in here by 1st of January. But we have learned in the US is that patients have 1 month of grace period, so they can stay on their existing treatment for 1 month before they have to change. So we expect first to see the effect of this coming into February. And then what we're doing now, when we have increased access, we're investing into market improved and expanded field force in areas where we see that we could have a good return of investment of that. And this is my second last picture, I think. So our net revenue last year was 644 million. We had a positive EBITDA of 78 million, positive cash flow 147. We had positive net cash position with 328 million in the bank. But what I think is worth noticing here is that we actually have, during the last 2 years, we've generated more than 300 million kroner in free cash flow, which has really strengthened that financial base for us and also to expand and to grow the company. So just looking ahead, we have a very strong financial platform. We have a positive EBIT. We've guided that we expect to be positive also in 2018. We have a pipeline of interesting projects that we see we can now, with the money we have, we can accelerate and expand further. We have market access that we can leverage. We think we start to see some signs right now, but I think that the big effect is coming a little later in the quarter. We have Zubsolv launch in Europe coming in second quarter. We have business development efforts where my aim is to add another product, but I'm not doing that if I can't find a product that is profitable for our shareholders. And finally, we have maybe the biggest overhang of them all, the patent litigation. And I feel that we have ground for optimism based on what we saw in the hearing we had with the federal court in October, and also based on the time now that have gone since that hearing, which is indicating there's going to be a change of the decision from the district court. And with that, I will end my presentation. Thank you for your attention.